Welcome everyone to our 5th Alumni Matters video, in which we'll be chatting to several alumni and learning more about their careers, their thoughts on some of the key challenges our world is facing, and discovering how they are helping to shape it into a healthier, fairer, greener place. My name is Megan Meyer, Alumni Communications Officer at the University of Exeter, and today we're joined by alumna Katherine Jachens, who graduated from Exeter with a degree in psychology in 2019. She recently worked as the Associate Staff Counsellor at the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, and is currently undertaking a PhD at the University of Nottingham in Occupational Health Psychology. We'll be chatting to her about her career, how we can look after ourselves when working in emotionally demanding careers, and how we can turn mental health awareness into action. Thank you for joining us today, Katherine, and welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. So I guess kind of where I wanted to kick off our chat today was what first interested you about getting involved in psychology, and how was that experience of your degree a few years ago in Exeter?
So psychology is such an interesting topic, especially if you want to go into it on a deeper level. When I was trying to decide what to study, I was interested in lots of different things, and I feel like psychology was a good blend of something scientific and creative and explorative, but also in itself a very interesting topic. I've always been very passionate about trying to understand human behavior, because you can really apply it to basically everything, and you can sort of investigate and discover seemingly abstract concepts, but in a scientific way with scientific methodology. At Exeter, it was wonderful. I really, really enjoyed it. Not just the course, but also, I made good friends and memories for life. So I couldn't recommend it highly enough. So there's just so many things you can go into depending on what you're interested in. So I think a lot of people, when they think of psychology, they think of it only as, I guess, the clinical part or like mental health issues. But actually the majority of what you study in psychology is typical behavior and human behavior and how the brain works, and that's really fascinating too for everyone. It can be applied. So yeah, but obviously the part mental health is incredibly important and interesting as well. So it's really just a great combination of everything.
And kind of building on that, I guess, your recent role, which you've just sort of concluded with the UN Refugee Agency as an Associate Staff Counsellor. So what led you, I guess, from the point in 2019, you just finished your degree in psychology and learning all these exciting things, to that role, and I guess approaching, given this is going out in Mental Health Awareness Week, the idea of looking at organisations and supporting people with their well-being?
I think it was during my final year, I decided I wanted to do organizational and occupational psychology. So I went into that and I did my master's straight after. To actually get into my role at UNHCR, I mean, for a very long time, even when I was in school, I really wanted to contribute to humanitarian work and, one day work for the UN. And it kind of seems inconceivable at the time. But I think really, if you put your mind to it and you're really passionate about something, you can make it happen. Sounds cliche, but it's true. So I basically wanted to combine what I'd studied, so the organizational psychology part, and then also find a job which was in the humanitarian sector. And then I was lucky enough to find that job in UNHCR. And then basically what my role was, it's more organization-wide projects trying to support staff at UNHCR in their well-being and mental health. So it's a very unique organization, and a lot of different humanitarian organizations are structured like this. I also worked at the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, and OCHA, which is the Humanitarian Affairs at the Secretariat for the UN. Staff are really exposed to a huge array of things in their career, and they really dedicate their career to the service of others, whether that be, refugees or people in conflict and asylum seekers and things like that. Yeah, trying to provide support for people who are really dedicating their lives to this is really a privilege and also an incredible responsibility, because it's quite unique in that aspect. So looking at different things to support them and what works for them, because everyone's unique. and is capable of really putting in place something that works for them. So just giving people the guidance and the motivation. It can be, I guess, it sounds difficult sometimes, because especially in these difficult situations where, you're in a high stress environment where everything seems urgent, because, you'll be working, say, providing food in a refugee camp or taking down cases, or if you're a healthcare worker, like you're a trauma surgeon in A&E, it's quite hard to visualize and how am I going to find space and time to prioritize myself. There's a lot of, I guess, selflessness in that the other people that I'm working to save and help, that's the priority, not me. But it's so important to prioritize yourself and just bringing awareness around that, because you can't look after people if you don't look after yourself. So that's really what's behind it.
Sort of thinking to that role that you were doing at the UN, what about it particularly brought you joy, or that you enjoyed in terms of like some of the aspects of that role, like particular projects or things that you got to work on?
I think the overarching thing is it's just incredibly rewarding, not just to help people in their careers, but also to contribute to a wider purpose, like essentially assisting refugees with their quality of life and integration and safety overall when you're working in an organization like that. So I think that's probably the biggest motivator for me. And then I guess just working and supporting the staff counselors in their role, because they all represent different regions, and supporting them with their unique needs depending on what's happening in which country. It's so diverse and every day is different, and I really enjoy that. And then myself, I'm also working on, we have UNHCR has a wellbeing platform, which is also an app, and we upload lots of content and programs and other things that staff can access, and collaborating on creating that content is also quite a creative part that also is quite empowering for staff to use themselves whenever they want, and I've really enjoyed working on that. A lot of it's regarding research, so looking into like the latest things and how we can apply that to policies and strategy. And I like research, so lots of numbers and doing the reporting, which I also enjoy. But then, most of it is talking with people and helping people in the regard, and just generally supporting people in their well-being, and just uplifting that as much as we can, and collaborating with all the different parts.
And speaking of things you enjoy, one of the aspects of discussion was sort of like, what are you looking forward to? And I know you've just started this PhD process. Could you tell me and my listeners a little bit about what you're looking forward to about that, and why that sort of came from?
So I've always wanted to do a PhD, so I'm very, very excited to do that. And as I said, I really enjoy research. And what I'm looking into is I'm looking at the well-being of surgeons, and in particular looking at bullying and harassment in surgeons in the NHS. Which, I think a lot of people have already read and heard about, recent articles that have come out surrounding that. So, and that again is something looking into supporting people in these high risk and stressful jobs. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's early days, but I have some ideas, and I'm really looking forward to just getting stuck in.
So thinking about that, obviously undertaking a PhD itself is demanding in a lot of ways, but also the roles that you've undertaken since graduating in these different organizations can be very emotionally demanding themselves, when you are supporting colleagues or other organizations that you're working with their well-being, that sort of occupational psychology side of things. And also I can imagine a lot of our alumni community do work in careers that are quite emotionally demanding. The question I was going to ask is how do you look after yourself like in that role? Because obviously you're very passionate about working in organizations that make a difference in other people, but how do you do that?
I think, there's several factors that contribute to this. I think in an ideal world, mental health would be the top priority in every organization, and all the people making the big decisions and leaders would prioritize it and put in place those support mechanisms and policies so people are actually able to best support their staff, and on an individual level, because at the end of the day it also does come down to you and your autonomy and the decisions you make. And I feel like part of that is firstly being realistic and honest with yourself in, I think, deep down, everyone sort of knows what they need and what would help their well-being. So really taking time to reflect on that. And then I'd also say, particularly in these stressful jobs and emotionally demanding jobs, is to, there's so many factors where you're not going to have control over, if you get along with your colleagues, and shift work and your workload and working hours and things like this are often beyond your control because emergencies happen when they happen. And to actually try and focus on what you can control, which, that's all, it's not a new concept, but it is something that you can do for yourself, like especially connecting on important things like social connections. I say this all the time. I think people who are in these emotionally demanding jobs can feel like no one can really understand what they're going through, and it's very hard for other people to relate to them because it's such a unique experience to be in a career like that. But to try and find those social connections and people that do care and are going to listen to you, and then also just social connections are so good for your well-being. I remember when I was at Exeter, I did a course or module in my last year called Psychology Applied to Health in the Medical School, and there was a big debate on this paper between the medical students and the psychology students, because it showed that things like sense of belonging and if you feel like you're part of a community and your social identity were just as predictive as things like smoking on your longevity, which is a huge finding. And I need to look up if that's still relevant, but it was a really interesting piece of research because it shows how important that is. So yeah, find your people, find people you can trust. And then also going back to basics. So I mean, the breath and mindfulness and grounding yourself, it's not just, fluffy stuff. It really does help to regulate your system. And then also just, sleep hygiene and nutrition is also very important for your overall mental health for anyone. So not to, forget that.
The world, as we were sort of just saying, in terms of social media, the frequency of news, climate change challenges, conflict taking place across the world and creating many refugees, growing inequalities, it seems like there's a lot going on. And, there is that question of, is it we're just more aware of it now and it's always been this way, but this can impact our mental health. And it's hard to juggle when considering that awareness of mental health that I think we're increasing. What do you feel helps turn that awareness of, oh yeah, these things are impacting my mental health and there are big systemic issues here, into action and actually improving things? And I'm not expecting you to kind of one word answer solve mental health crisis, but sort of some food for thought maybe on that one.
I guess to start, I think we've definitely become more aware of how interconnected we are and how much information we receive, especially after the pandemic. Pretty sure doom scrolling was termed in the pandemic, and now this is just such a common phenomena. I think my take on that is it's, there's a time and place, and it's good for us to stay aware so that we are informed and can take that conscious decision to take action if we want to on things that we care about. But then I'd also say, from a psychological perspective, guilt and shame are probably the most debilitating emotions there are. It's very characteristic of, what characterizes lots of mental health issues and disorders. And while it's natural and we all experience, it's never helpful. So to just, I guess, be aware of that, take a note and put it aside to do something that's actually going to uplift you in a sense. Just make that conscious decision and be more proactive in how you handle that. And then I guess bringing awareness into action. Again, I'd probably say it's good to be truthful with yourself. In general, I would say that a lot of people who are already very invested in mental health, so particularly people with mental health issues, and we all have mental health and it looks different for everyone, already so aware, take the time and energy to go deeper and find that understanding through their own experiences and then reading around it or talking with other people. And I feel like people who are already really engage with it find it much easier to put that into action. But where, from my experience, where the challenge lies is trying to engage people who don't really prioritize it as much, maybe see it as something that's not relevant to them. So, our mental health is just something we need to include because, HR said so, or, it doesn't really apply to me, or it doesn't even exist. The beliefs about understanding mental health, unfortunately, some people, it's if you believe in it or not. So I think, and while it's easier said than done, trying to engage in conversations with people who perhaps aren't as engaged with it, to try and deepen that understanding that might eventually lead to real action and change. So that is the challenge, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think you're right, Ben, because it's almost similar to the issue we face maybe in like the political sphere, or like with climate changes. The people who care about this stuff are already the people who are talking about it and raising awareness. So we're almost in some echo chambers, but the point, like you suggest, is maybe when that does turn into action is when we are having a collective view on it, and that those number of voices are coming from all different spheres in society, so it can't be blocked out and it does have to change. Because I think what frustrates me in this sphere, being sort of quite passionate about my own well-being and that of others, is like the empty word syndrome almost that comes along with some of these things, that we are definitely getting better at noticing mental health and mental ill health and looking after ourselves, but that often isn't followed up by funding or change. It's just, oh, we need to talk about it more. So I'm remaining hopeful that add more voices and the change will come. To wrap things up today, Katherine, I was going to just sort of ask you, and I know we've touched on this a little bit in some of our responses and our conversations today, but do you have any advice or top tips for the alumni community on how to stay mentally well themselves, and in maybe recent graduates who struggle with that transition post-university life?
I think general advice, working climate, it's quite interesting at the moment, and to just remain confident within yourself, and to, make sure that you're doing something is fulfilling. And for people who are transitioning, I think that's quite a unique stage of life. I remember when I transitioned, it was in the middle of the pandemic, and I was doing all my job interviews online, but when it was very new, and it was quite a confusing time. And I think a lot of people who, especially people who I think really value their education or take pride in what they've learned and what they do, they can really attach it to their sort of self-concept. And I think I am one of those people. I think it's very human, but I can imagine moving from being a student and having that, for years, engaging with that, to then becoming I guess unemployed and looking for jobs, because that's how I felt. And sometimes, that imposter syndrome can really sneak up on you. It does work out, and to just make sure that when you're going through all of this, give yourself, that patience and that grace to look after yourself in between, as things I've mentioned before, going back to the basics, and just know like really what your vision is, and to look after yourself, because how fast or how slow or however job you get, and if you end up in something you didn't really want to do, and then the path is not what you thought it was going to be, that doesn't impact your worth or your ever-ending goals. So yeah, it's an interesting journey, and it looks different for everyone, but just believe in yourself and don't let go of what's important. And ultimately your mental health is the most important thing, health overall. So just always remember that. Yeah,
It's a brilliant note to bring things to a close on. Thank you so much, Katherine. I hope everyone watching and listening today has enjoyed the experience of doing that, and also a reminder to keep your eyes peeled on our socials and our website for our final Alumni Matters video of the year, which will be launching in a few months. Thank you so much, Katherine.
thank you.